Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever considered that the words we hear every single day are more than just, information? They are, in fact, invisible weapons. Today, we're going to unpack a fascinating academic study that reveals exactly how language is used in this massive, symbolic struggle for power and identity. It's really not just about what is being said, it's about how it's being said to literally shape our reality. So, I've got to ask you, do you actually hear what politicians are saying? Actually, think about the everyday digital media we all consume. Maybe it's that podcast you listen to on your morning commute. We kind of just absorb them passively, right? Well, researchers argue that these everyday broadcasts are frequently loaded with hidden ideological mechanisms, all perfectly designed to influence our beliefs without us even realizing it. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at language as a weapon. Then, the decoder ring. Next, the Abrindo O Verbo case, followed by dissecting political tactics, and finally, we'll wrap up with the power of critical listening.
All right, Section 1, Language as a Weapon.
Modern media isn't just some mirror reflecting reality back at us, it's actively constructing it. Think about this concept of cultural pedagogy. Researchers point out that the media acts almost like a giant classroom. It's literally teaching us how to interpret the world around us. It defines our beliefs, it totally plays on our fears, and it shapes our social aspirations. What this means is that critical media literacy is absolutely essential. I mean, if we aren't actively analyzing what we consume, we run a huge risk of simply being passively programmed by whoever's controlling the dominant discourse.
Moving right along to Section 2, the decoder ring.
To stop being passive listeners, we need a tool. And today, we're using a fascinating academic framework utilized by linguists to uncover hidden power dynamics in speech. It's called Critical Discourse Analysis, or CDA. Developed by British linguist Norman Fairclough, this is our analytical lens for today. It studies the deep internal connections between language, power, and society. Basically, CDA allows us to act as impartial observers, helping us clearly see how specific textual practices either reinforce or challenge social power. Think of it as an X-ray scanner for political speech. And this brilliantly illustrates how our X-ray scanner works. It looks at three simultaneous meanings in any statement. First, the actional meaning, which is how the speaker interacts with other texts, known as intertextuality. Second, the representational meaning, how they represent the world and the actors in it. And third, the identificational meaning, how the speaker evaluates things and builds their own identity, often called modality. We're going to apply these exact three categories to decode some actual speech today.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Abrindo O Verbo case.
Let's apply this framework to a real-world scenario. We're going to act as impartial forensic analysts examining a very specific data set from a recent linguistics study. Researchers Ramon Miranda and Ana Maria Salmartins analyzed a full hour-long interview from a Brazilian radio show and podcast called Abrindo O Verbo. This went down on September 11, 2024, right during the highly contested mayoral elections in São Luís, Maranhão. The guest was candidate Yglésio Moyses. Now, the researchers' goal here was to observe exactly how this politician used language to construct his public image and manipulate listener opinion during a really high-stakes campaign. Let's get into it with Section 4, Dissecting Political Tactics.
This is where we put our decoder ring to work on some specific, translated quotes. Here, the candidate is targeting his opponent, the current mayor, Breed. He says, but Breed is a disguised communist. First, he learned to be mayor with Flávio Dino's way of governing. What is it? He doesn't dialogue with anyone. Now, on the surface, this might just sound like standard, everyday political mudslinging, right? But let's look a little deeper.
Through the lens of interdiscursivity, the researchers show the candidate is actively summoning an anti-communist discourse. And using the evaluation metric, he's placing a very strong negative judgment on his opponent, framing him as authoritarian. The researchers note that this isn't just some random insult thrown out there. It's a highly calculated linguistic tactic designed to manipulate the historical Red Scare myth. By linking his opponent to communism, the study finds he delegitimizes his adversary while reinforcing a very specific ideological worldview for the listener. Let's see how this builds with our second quote. Here, the candidate jumps into the highly polarizing topics of abortion and public health, suggesting state intervention. He says they need to show that there's an alternative solution to the situation, that it doesn't need to reach the calamity of taking a life, a child that hasn't even breathed yet. So if we just look at the service text, it sounds like an offer of state assistance to protect life. Pretty straightforward. But when we flip on that X-ray analysis, the researchers point out strong intertextuality with religious and conservative pro-life movements. By using heavy phrases like calamity of taking a life, the study argues the discourse subtly culpabilizes women and totally undermines the historical feminist fight for bodily autonomy. The researchers note this effectively positions the state as the ultimate controller of women's bodies, heavily reinforcing traditional gender roles under the guise of public assistance. Now, check out this third quote. This one is fascinating, because the politician directly contrasts his own personality with the current mayor's. He states, "I'm a guy that everyone who knows me knows I live, always exchanging ideas with everyone. Unlike the mayor who pouts every time he is challenged." Notice the concepts of modality and actor representation at play here. Look at the extreme assertiveness in the modality. I am a guy. He represents himself as the ultimate democratic actor, a guy who is always exchanging ideas. Conversely, how does he represent his opponent? As a child who pouts. The researcher finding here is that these specific, deliberate linguistic choices are designed to elevate his own political identity to a position of superior maturity while linguistically burying his opponent's credibility. It's incredibly effective. Let's pivot to the fourth quote, which shifts the focus over to education. The candidate criticizes what he refers to as gender ideology in schools, stating, quote, "They often receive direction in class to worry about issues that are not related to the teaching-learning process." He then goes on to list traditional subjects like math and language as the only valid curriculum. Looking through our decoder ring, the researchers see two totally competing discourses clashing here. On one side, you have the conservative discourse that frames gender ideology as an active, looming threat. On the other, an educational discourse that artificially hierarchizes subjects, basically saying math and grammar matter, but social issues just don't. The study reveals that this is a tactical move to install a strict technical education model. By defining what is and isn't a real subject, the authors argued the speaker linguistically silences marginalized voices and completely excludes necessary conversations about diversity from the classroom. Finally, let's look at this heavily charged fifth quote regarding the recent passing of civil rights bills, which the candidate calls the LGBT package. He states, "To say that Braid is a coward because he didn't have the courage to veto this LGBT package that was approved now in April." So, the absolutely crucial mechanism at work here is explicit evaluation. Using the word coward is a direct, harsh, negative judgment applied to the act of protecting minority rights. The intertextuality clearly echoes reactionary conservative voices. The researchers conclude that these specific linguistic choices do so much more than just criticize a bill. They actively legitimize homotransphobia. By framing the expansion of rights as a cowardly act, the discourse crystallizes discrimination and totally normalizes the exclusion of minority communities. And that brings us to our final section, the power of critical listening. So let's pan out from these specific quotes from the study to the macro takeaway here. Why does this linguistic breakdown matter for absolutely everyone consuming digital media today? Well, it all comes down to the massive difference between passive consumption and critical reading. When we passively consume podcasts, videos, or articles, we're accepting political speech at face value, which leaves the door wide open for ideological manipulation. But when we apply critical reading, using that decoder ring we learned about today, we completely empower ourselves. We uncover the hidden mechanisms of power, we see exactly how hegemony is maintained, and we recognize social asymmetries that are deeply woven into everyday language. This study proves that words are never just words, guys. They are literal structures of power. So I want to leave you with this thought. The next time you pop your headphones in on your commute or turn on a political interview, remember the X-ray scanner. Look for the intertextuality, pay attention to the evaluations, and notice how the actors are being represented. What is the next thing you listen to trying to hide? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely stay curious.